A ship accumulates marine growth on its hull as it traverses through water. Some would suggest that our souls do a similar thing, accumulating trauma from the challenging and difficult circumstances that life puts us through. This is understandable on one end. We can all point to situations in our past that seem to still bother us in conscious and sometimes subconscious ways. On the other hand, one could perhaps make the case that a Stoic does not let the past bother them. Is trauma a real thing, or is it simply an unstoic way of looking at your past? Trauma, like all human ideas, can be given a discovery date. Even human words can be given a discovery date. It goes back to the 1800s. Jean-Martin Charcot, he was French, that's why I pronounced it like that. He first proposed this idea in 1887. Pierre Janet, his student, further developed his ideas. And then pretty much simultaneously, Sigmund Freud, whom we all know, studied the idea of trauma. I'm not going to bore you with the history of these studies, but in sum, the idea of trauma is that something that happened in our past is causing certain behaviors in our present selves. Take the example of a child who was neglected by her parents. She will grow up with a particular set of psychological trauma that dictates how she shows up in the world. We could call this causation or cause and effect. If we want to get even a bit more nerdy, we could call this etiology, which is the study of causation. Trauma can take many, many forms, but the idea is that something happened in our past that has emotionally scarred or broken us, and it affects our present selves. It would be hard for me to convince you that that isn't true right now. I'm quite certain that as I'm describing this, you're thinking about that time you got bullied and how that makes you sheepish, or how your father abandoned you and that makes you emotionally defensive, or how you broke your leg falling out of a tree and that makes you afraid of heights. And certainly, I would never make the claim that challenging circumstances can and do affect us in some ways. But let me plant this question in your mind. Does a psychologically healthy person spend a great deal of time thinking about the past? Why are we so obsessed with the past? Why do so many of us spend perhaps hours at a time thinking about what happened before the present, connecting it to our current insufficiencies? Jordan Peterson's thoughts on the matter is that the past gives us an emotional response when we haven't extracted the lesson that we need in order to move forward. Let me give you this quote from Peterson. People think that the purpose of memory is to remember the past. That's not the purpose of memory. The purpose of memory is to extract out from the past lessons to structure the future. That's the purpose of personal memory. So you're done with a memory when you've extracted the information that you can use to guide yourself properly in the future. If you have a traumatic memory, for example, that's obsessing you, if you analyze that memory to the point where you figured out how you put yourself at risk, you can determine how you might avoid that in the future. Then the emotion associated with that goes away. Let's say that you were bullied as a kid. It may seem insensitive to ask this, but I'm going to ask this anyway. What part of you being bullied is your own fault? And maybe the answer to that question is nothing at all. And maybe that's the right answer to that question. But maybe the answer is that you played some very small role in that. Now, bullies are externals. They are not up to you in the Stoic sense, but what is up to you is your thoughts and opinions. If a bully is calling you a loser every day, that can only truly affect you if you value that person's opinion. Now, that's Stoicism. You cannot change other people's behaviors, but you can change your judgments. Now, before I come off as being too insensitive, I am not making the case that kids should be or are capable of being Stoic sages. That would be a ridiculous standard. What I am saying is that getting bullied can be viewed as an opportunity to practice Stoicism. How many people do you hear say that they were thankful that they were bullied? It's not a trick question. Chris Williamson, host of the Modern Wisdom podcast, he often talks about how, had he not been bullied, he wouldn't be successful today. David Goggins was bullied. George St. Pierre, the UFC fighter. Joe Rogan. Bullying is clearly wrong. Clearly. What is also wrong, according to Stoicism, is labeling being bullied as a bad thing. It's not to a Stoic because it's not within your control. It's outside of your control. It's an opportunity to practice virtue. Now, if you're a big kid, say, and you see another smaller kid getting bullied, the Stoic response is to intervene. Again, bullying is clearly wrong. Stoics uphold justice. If, however, you are a small kid being bullied, the Stoic response is to practice the dichotomy of control, to make yourself more capable, more confident, perhaps to train. What's within your control? Can you journal about processing your judgments? If someone's insulting you about your hair or your height or your skin color, can you change your judgment on that? Can you say, you know what, I don't really value that person's opinion anyway, so it doesn't really matter what they say about me? Can you take a boxing class to make yourself more competent physically? Ooh, now that's interesting. Yes, Stoics do aim to be physically capable. Socrates said, it is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable. Of course, Socrates was pre-Stoic, but he's often considered to be the grandfather of Stoicism, or the godfather of Stoicism at least. What if you're physically disabled? Now that's not up to you. That's outside of your control. But what can you do given the cards that you were dealt? Can you do pull-ups? Can you do push-ups? Can you run? Can you do literally anything to make yourself more competent? That's what a Stoic does. So what's the principles here? We just went through the example of bullying, something that is morally wrong to do. But if you're the one being bullied, it's an indifferent. What are the principles here? First, I mentioned it just now, the dichotomy of control. What other people do, even if that person is, say, your father, is not up to you. You can't directly stop your father from being abusive. But what can you do? What's within your control? You can get help. You can tell your teachers. You can journal. You can train in the gym. You can do whatever you can to get out of that situation. But you can't change other people's actions. And you know what else you can't change? The past. The past is an external. It's not up to you. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. That's not what the Stoics meant. As Peterson said, we should aim to process the past, extract the lesson, and then move on with our lives. Does that mean that if you find yourself emotionally disturbed by past events, that you just try and ignore it and force it down? Absolutely not. You cannot push down your feelings. That's not Stoicism. You can journal. You can write down everything you remember in detail. And then you write down what the lesson here is. The harsh truth, the very harsh truth, is that whatever happens to us, we do have a small part to play in that. Now, how can that be Stoic? Because the environment is an external. Yes, our environment is an external. And it's not up to us because all externals are not up to us. But we are a part of our environment, paradoxically. So we do play a role in its actions. What part of the problem is yours? Maybe you can do therapy. Maybe you can do some therapy because really that's just a guided version of journaling. Now, the point here is that, yes, you have to extract the lessons from your past so that you can move forward, but ultimately understand that the past is not up to you. It's done. It happened. It's over. What now? That's the only question you can really ask yourself. I did an episode a while back titled The Story We Tell Ourselves. It's episode 281 for anyone who wants to go back and listen. Dear friend, you can tell yourself whichever story you want. You can tell yourself that you can't make friends because you were neglected as a child. Or you can tell yourself that you have the strength and the courage to get out into the world and make a friend. You can tell yourself that you can't be successful at work because your father never taught you how to work hard. Or you can tell yourself that you have agency to start on a journey that will ultimately make you more successful. Trauma is only real if we make it real. Don't be a victim. You're stronger than you know. Don't be a person who blames everything on their past. You are stronger than you know. Don't be a person who justifies their current position in life by referencing something that happened 10 years ago. You are stronger than you know. We really are quite remarkable creatures, us human beings. We can suffer war, exile, fatigue, heartbreak, disease, slavery. We can suffer, period. Don't underestimate yourself. Don't underestimate your ability to be formidable. You have everything it takes to be a courageous person in the world. The only question you have to ask yourself is this: are you ready to start down this road? Are you ready to process what happened in the past, to grow from it, to learn from it? Are you ready to own your story, own your narrative, to write the remaining chapters of your life? Or are you perfectly content letting the world write your story for you? I hope the choice is pretty clear. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe with the notifications turned on. The Strong Stoic Podcast is also available in audio wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, you can join Substack to gain access to transcripts, articles, and premium podcast episodes.